As Grand Theft Auto 6 comes closer and closer to peeking over the horizon, something we're hearing think pieces about more frequently these days is people who believe Grand Theft Auto 5 was a downgrade, because GTA 4's vehicle physics were more realistic. If you like watching gaming video essays, I'm sure you've seen at least one video with this premise show up in your recommended. While I absolutely understand the inclination toward this conclusion, as a car person who has played sim racers for 20 odd years now, I have to strongly disagree. I got GTA 4 day one, and in fact I got the fancy lockbox edition at that. There are absolutely things I love about the game, from Nico as a character, to the tone, to the Euphoria physics and Rage AI, and yes, despite what one might assume based on the title of this video, I also really enjoy the vehicle physics. My biggest issue with the game as a whole is honestly that I don't think Manhattan and the surrounding areas make for a terribly great environment for an open world car game. Liberty City is very repetitive to drive through thanks to the abundance of extremely straight roads and 90-degree turns encroached upon by claustrophobically large, square buildings that nearly all lack any gameplay features to explore. I also got GTA 5's Middle Edition on day one, and I love a lot about that game too. And just like with GTA 4, I really enjoy the driving physics. However, most of the comparisons I've seen are often in bad faith. They feel like they've been crafted by now adults who were like 12 when GTA 5 came out because it's been that long, and it was their first game in the series. So now, in order to prove that they're officially an adult gamer guy who has higher tastes than that, they gush about how things were better in the times before, and they can hang with the big dogs by praising the older games. Not every video is like that, of course. Despite the inflammatory thumbnail and title, Dark Spaces, The Problem with GTA 5's arcade-style driving, was mostly solid, and tried to put the work in to be fair. I'll link it in the description. But so many of them are inherently mean-spirited, and even more frustratingly, inaccurate to such a degree that it's pretty much useless as a resource on the subject it aims to discuss. To put it simply, GTA 5's physics are not excessively dumbed down. One thing many of these video essays fail to mention is that the physics and handling were actually co-authored by the team that did the Midnight Club series. That should be a clear indication of both the fact that the people involved knew what they wanted, and knew what they were doing. GTA 5's physics do employ an excess of grip, and offer stiffer suspensions with more responsive steering than GTA 4 overall, and the better steering interpolation allows for finer tuning of inputs, instead of going from one extreme to the other in ways that quickly destabilize the car. But that also doesn't mean that it's inherently simpler nor less realistic. What it instead does is trade some realistic elements for others, to craft an experience that is much easier and more intuitive to get to grips and do well with, without lowering the skill ceiling in the process. Yes, really, GTA 5's skill ceiling is just as high as GTA 4's, if not slightly higher in a couple of ways. My problem with these videos on the subject is not that they prefer GTA 4 to GTA 5 in terms of vehicle physics and handling, it's the supposed objectivity they often come at it with, while using very crude and rudimentary understanding of the physics at play. On the surface, GTA 4's physics scream realism, partially because they have a much higher skill floor. It's also partially because the vehicles are slower and have more heft, but it's mostly because every vehicle's driving characteristics channel those of an SUV with blown shocks and bald tires. When it's this easy to oversteer a car, and the suspension lifts so much on the inside rear tire that you could fit a whole Halo LAN party in there, it sparks a light in your brain that tells you what you're expecting is realistic. But this has more to do with how much it stands out from its peers by making these choices, and how our social biases influence what we're taking away from experiences. GTA 4's physics are a sharp contrast to earlier video games, and generally more arcade-like experiences. It really effectively taps into our innate assumptions about what makes something more realistic. More realistic things are generally perceived to be more difficult and nuanced than games traditionally are, and most of us would likely assume that things like sliding and spinning out are some of the major indicators of failure failure to properly handle a car in real life. That's a common trope in driving-related shows and driving-related action movie scenes, and for decades, around half the life of the land-based motor vehicle, that was also the standard conclusion to poor driving. Drive like shit, and you're gonna lose grip and slide if not spin the car. While these assumptions and feelings aren't wholly without merit, and often can be applied appropriately to the media we're discussing, by and large that's not the case when it comes to GTA 4's vehicle physics discourse, so let's get into why. And hey, really quickly, if you like this video so far, maybe think about dropping a sub and hitting the bell and the like button. And if you love it, toss out a comment letting me know why, and share the video with someone else you think might enjoy it. One of the major pitfalls that videos on this subject often fall into is conflating immersion with something being realistic, as briefly highlighted before. Just because something tickles your innate biases in ways that seem to fall in line with real life doesn't mean they actually do. An easy example of this can be found in games like Guitar Hero or Rock Band, where on rare occasion you'll find sections that are actually harder in the game than they are on real guitar. Eddie Van Halen tapping is a perfect example, but people don't always know that because they conflate speed and complexity in what they're hearing with an assumed complexity to play on an actual instrument, and they assume the video game is going to be easier than the real thing. Because duh, why wouldn't it be? It's important to recognize that how realistic an element of a game is can adjust based on the perspective you're looking at it from. For a really simple example, it's pretty safe for all of us to agree that a game like the original Castlevania has a more realistic jump than many other platformers at the time, right? Specifically because it's a jump that can't be controlled in midair. Just like in real life, you have to commit to it once it's started. But by that same token, one could argue it's woefully unrealistic to have a protagonist that uses jumps as one of his primary sources of navigation in the first place. How often do you actually jump in real life, let alone with an incredible vertical like Simon Belmont, which eclipses your own standing height? Bro should be in the NBA, not whipping monsters like it's your BDSM group's Halloween party. Both the realism and unrealism of Simon's jump can coexist as truths from these two perspectives. The issue arises when supposedly objective comparisons to other games' jumping mechanics are made, but only one perspective is handpicked to represent the realism of Simon's jump. These comparisons do not speak for themselves. The person making them is speaking for the game, myself included, even when you're saying nothing verbally. A channel like Crowcat is biased, whether you like it or not, because he's choosing what's shown, when, and how. And it's therefore up to us to try and be fair to the games being compared, rather than working backwards from a conclusion we want to defend. For me, in fact, this video wasn't even originally intended to compare GTA 4's driving physics to GTA 5. It was supposed to simply dispel some myths about how realistic GTA 4's physics are. I had accepted that GTA 5's cars had a lower skill ceiling and were more homogeneous. It was only when I went back to experiment with GTA 5 when I realized people kind of have that game pegged wrong too. The best way to compare GTA 4's physics to real life, without needing to have access to a wealth of different vehicles and a test track, would be to compare it to simulators. This is something I've yet to see in any of the videos I've personally watched on this subject, except for Dark Spaces, and he only does it briefly and more to set the stage than actually draw conclusions. The video authors will often compare the game to cherry-picked real-life footage, or even nothing at all other than our base assumptions about car physics, and I'd wager this is often because either the simulator didn't back up their claims, or because they don't play sims and don't actually know enough about the subject to be the authority they're acting as. Also, it's worth stating that I'm not running under the assumption that GTA 4 has to basically be a sim in order to be realistic in noteworthy ways. That should be obvious, but the point here is more to hold commonly cited reasons for why GTA 4's physics are supposedly so realistic up to actual scrutiny. Do these specific elements actually hold a level more realism than GTA 5 in ways GTA 5 can't make up for with its own realistic elements? Now, before we get into where GTA 5 is less realistic than advertised by these video essays, we should probably list off the most common sources of realism you see referenced in these videos. Let's explore what elements and angles people find captivating and realistic within this physics system. First, and most obvious, while it doesn't doesn't automatically translate to realism, the reactive nature of the vehicle's suspension systems was really awe-inspiring at the time, especially for an open-world game. Even today, most open-world driving models are unfortunately basic and stiff. The cars usually feel like they're on rails, suspensions barely react to anything, tires almost never slip or slide in extreme conditions, etc. But here in GTA 4, the suspensions feel like a legitimate part of how the vehicle handles, and will both react to and instigate errant behaviors in the cars you drive. Suspensions in GTA 4 bound and rebound to a highly variable degree, and you can feel how that interacts with the grip levels of the car and the weight of the vehicle. Vehicles in GTA 4 skew toward having low grip and high weight. Something bigger in the game has a larger impact in crashes, but is also harder to manage on the road at speed, and that weight swings around as you steer the car, pushing and pulling on the suspension, which can cause a lack of grip and therefore a loss of traction and control. This combination of high weight, high suspension travel, low grip, and low turn-in response is the most overtly obvious part of the entire vehicle physics system in GTA 4. It's what you'll both feel and see as soon as you get behind the wheel of anything in the game, and it's therefore usually the bedrock upon which arguments in favor of the game's realism lay, especially because it's so novel that most players won't have experience with physics like this. This immediately feels difficult to manage if you're not used to more realistic driving physics, and that's because it is more realistic than previous GTA games and most of the game's peers. Just like the Euphoria ragdoll systems and such the game also uses, it feels dynamic and like it responds directly to your inputs. You feel less like your hand is being held and therefore more in direct control of the car, or less in control if you make a mistake. Even today, GTA 4 stands out because of this choice. Another realistic element that's not commonly cited is the abundance of traction control on vehicles. Clearly, there is a traction control system in use here, or else some limitation of the driving model that causes traction control-like behaviors. For those that don't know, traction control systems try to prevent your car's wheels from slipping during acceleration and turn-in so that you can put more of your power down when necessary, and don't put too much down when it would lead to mistakes or accidents. It's designed to keep you in control of the car and keep the car doing what you want it to do in different situations. Most cars over the last few decades have come with traction control standard, and it can rarely be disabled outside of sports cars. Again, it's not a common talking point, but this is something that mirrors reality in some ways, and will be important to discuss a bit more later. Accidents in GTA 4 can cause extreme effects like wheels getting stuck under fenders, or the vehicle tracking down the road because it ends up crooked. I won't really get into the vehicle accident physics here because that's its own can of worms, where some elements of GTA 4 are wonderfully realistic and other elements are comically exaggerated, but the fact that crashing can affect the driving experience in ways that are based on the physics of the crash, rather than pre-scripted damage modifiers like previous games in the genre would have done, was and still is rather special. It's worth mentioning really quickly that I'm not going to tackle how either GTA 4 or 5 handles downforce as a concept either. While it's important in real-life driving, it's so unrealistically handled in GTA that any realism it might add is simply too blunt to be valuable in this conversation. Suffice it to say that GTA 4 almost universally has too little downforce at speed, and GTA 5 has too much. This effectively translates to sportier cars at high speed feeling too uncontrolled in GTA 4, and more mundane vehicles at higher speeds feeling too controlled in GTA 5. Basically, it's a wash. Furthermore, if you want a more comprehensive look at other elements of vehicle realism within this comparison discussion, I would recommend the aforementioned Dark Space video. It goes over a load of extra things, from how the cars handle flat tires, glass breaking, character ejection through the windshield, how cars get dirty and get cleaned, and much more that has little to do with the actual driving physics. Anyway, Grand Theft Auto 4 also supposedly employs actual drivetrain variations. Drivetrains can be broken down into two factors that work together to create different driving experiences. These factors are engine location and which wheels are the drive wheels that move the car forward. Front engine means the motor's in the front, mid-engine means it's slightly in front of the rear wheels, and rear engine means the motor is on top of or behind the rear wheels. Any one of these can then be combined with either the car being front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, or all-wheel drive. Supposedly, all-wheel drive vehicles in GTA 4 also push different amounts of power to the front and rear wheels, just like real cars. In theory, this is cool and again realistic. Different drivetrain configurations handle vastly differently. They will have an effect on every element we've discussed up to this point, and in particular how the weight shifts on the suspension and how the car responds when we reach the limits of grip. Moreover, it affects how the car accelerates, decelerates, the ease with which a mistake can be corrected, how responsive the car is, and more. It's really when we start to examine GTA 4's driving physics closer that things end up falling apart a bit. Let's take a more nuanced look at all the elements we just discussed in reverse order. So to start, while different drivetrains have some level of impact in GTA 4, it seems much more limited than you would expect. The vast majority of cars in the game are front-engine, rear-wheel drive. This is the classic configuration that leads to the preconceptions I alluded to before that people have about cars. A front-engine, rear-wheel drive car breaks traction and slides easily. It will oversteer and spin if you're too aggressive, etc. I get this from a gameplay perspective, and it's something GTA 5 carries as well. This is widely considered the most fun drivetrain configuration in real life for a reason, and it allows for most of the coolest action driving stunts you see in movies, new and old. Even when you see an all-wheel drive car like the Subaru Impreza in a movie like Baby Driver, one of the versions of the cars used in the movie had to be converted to rear-wheel drive to do some of the stunts you see. And when they did use one of the all-wheel drive cars, they had to be careful in how they shot it, or do things like wet the street to allow it to properly break traction like rear-wheel drive cars could. The point being, rear-wheel drive cars are the reason we imagine cars behaving in certain ways when pushed to the limit and beyond. In reality though, the amount of rear-wheel drive cars on the road has decreased drastically since the 70s and 80s. Front-wheel drive cars are the standard because they don't oversteer and spin out near as easily. Instead, they understeer when pushed too far, so they're considered much safer for your average shitty driver. But it's not near as fun to play a crime driving game if most cars plow through corners instead of sliding like an action movie. Even with the purpose of this discrepancy accounted for though, GTA 4 kind of fails to some extent to even capture the differences between various drivetrains. Cars like the Blista Compact, based primarily on the 90s Honda CRX, are front-wheel drive. They will understeer if you only try to maneuver it one way, but once you transition and the weight shifts, they're still extremely willing to slip and slide like it's wet outside, much more than in reality. Cars that are supposedly all-wheel drive, like the Sultan or Sultan RS, feel remarkably similar to other rear-wheel drive cars in the game as well. Similar issues can be found with engine placement. Engine placement seems to be purely aesthetic in GTA 4. I don't think engine placement affects traction, weight transfer, or weight distribution at all. It seems like every car is fundamentally just a block of weight distributed evenly across the model and the vehicle suspension, at least in regards to traction and suspension behaviors. This means many of the most important characteristics to different cars are lost on the game. Vehicles like the Comet, which is based off of a few rear-engine Porsches, the Sultan RS, which is based off of the front-engine, all-wheel drive Subaru Impreza WRX STI, or the Turismo being a mid-engine, rear-wheel drive Ferrari 360/430, and a modern McLaren/Ferrari LaFerrari in GTA 5, all largely feel the same. They feel more like a unified class of car, high-end sports cars, than cars unto themselves, and that extends to the other fastest cars in the game, like the Banshee. I cannot stress enough how much of an impact this element of car design should have, but it either doesn't have an impact at all, or it's often so minimal that it hardly matters. The Banshee is primarily based on a Dodge Viper, which is a long-nosed, front-engine, rear-wheel drive car with much more power than sense. If you push it even slightly too hard, it will smack you so hard upside the head that you'll wake up 3 days later in diapers and a bib calling it daddy. But while fast, the Banshee feels tame and gutless compared to the unwieldy and chaotic nature of its real-world counterpart. The Sultan RS is vaguely a mashup of elements of the Subaru Impreza WRX STI, the Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution, and the Lexus IS300. It's supposedly all-wheel drive as mentioned earlier. It even apparently has more power going to the rear wheels than the base Sultan does, with the base car being 50-50 and the RS apparently being 30% in front and 70% in rear. But while it is significantly faster than the base Sultan, the RS doesn't feel like it has any more of a rear wheel bias, and neither car feels distinctly all-wheel drive in the first place. Likewise, while far from perfect, many of these things are actually elements of driving that GTA 5 handles better. All-wheel drive cars generally feel more demonstrably all-wheel drive. More grip, more prone to understeer, and much better handling of extreme weight shifts. They still tend to do rear-wheel burnouts just like in GTA 4, which is often impossible or very difficult to do in real life, but it's an improvement. The only car that I found which was somewhat of an exception was the Infernus, which felt more appropriately all-wheel drive in GTA 5, but in GTA 4 still felt grippy enough compared to most of its peers. Mid and rear engine cars feel a bit more unique from their front engine counterparts as well. Cars that should oversteer more generally do, even if most cars are still largely planted in GTA 5. Front-wheel drive cars take a bit more effort to break loose, and are much more willing to go back to understeering if you let the car's weight settle again. Sports and supercars feel planted and agile like they should, and cars are more willing to burn the tires off from a launch, if they have the power. A Dukes, which is modeled after old Dodge Chargers and Challengers, will fail to grip from a standstill for longer than something like an Emperor or a Glendale. Mid-engine cars feel like their pivot point when rotating into a corner is more centered as it should be, while a rear-engine car like the Comet grips really well but is more prone to snap oversteer. Newer cars that are designed for sports and racing use tend to have a quicker steering response and can put their power down better. It's easy to say that every car feels the same in GTA 5, but I don't think that's true. I think a more honest description would be that all cars have a higher base level of grip and responsiveness than in GTA 4, and a lower average weight, but both games overshoot the mark in different ways. Another simultaneously realistic and highly unrealistic element of GTA 4 is how traction is handled. As mentioned before, traction control seems to be widely in use across GTA 4's roster of cars. In real life, most cars you drive on the road have traction control dating back decades, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a vehicle even by the time of GTA 4's release that didn't have it, and in most cars, you can't disable it. In this way, GTA 4 scores, as does GTA 5. Both games have what really feel like universal traction control systems that apply broadly to basically every vehicle. And what this means is that both games have vehicles that will basically have their power sucked away from the wheels to maintain grip and therefore stability whenever they end up in extreme situations. Once you enter a slide, power drops off a cliff until you regain grip. If you've ever wondered why it was so hard to drift in GTA 5 until they added the drift tires, this would be why. At best in most vehicles, under most circumstances, you're stuck power sliding until you straighten out. The best vanilla drifting I found in GTA 5 was driving an upgraded Futo whenever it was snowy in GTA Online. This was one of the only circumstances where actual drifting with countersteering could be maintained in ways that reflected real life. GTA 4 is no different. The part that makes no sense in both games but feels worse in GTA 4 is that this applies to cars that wouldn't have traction control because they're too old or their real-world counterparts don't have it, as well as cars that are so powerful that their traction control systems are more like suggestions. GTA 5 handles this okay. Franklin's Buffalo will spin the tires from a standstill launch, and eventually grip up. The Dukes spins them for longer, and is more likely to rotate sideways as it does so, owing to the softer suspension. A car like the Comet will spin the tires for a shorter duration, and once it grips harder because the engine is over the drive wheels. And the car's traction systems are more advanced. In GTA 4, it's very hard to get any car to do anything but a largely uncontrolled slide or a weak power slide. And transitioning while sliding is only really viable when the turns line up with how the traction control system works. It's not about you matching your steering and throttle inputs to the corner like you would in real life. You have to match the corner to the limitations imposed by the traction control instead. It's severely limited. Similarly, even ultra-powerful cars are much less likely to spin the tires from a standstill in GTA 4, unless you do a brake stand burnout by holding down the brakes and the throttle at the same time. If you just gun it from a stop, old car or new car, supercar, town car, muscle car, doesn't matter. Most cars just putz up to speed like they're your grandma's front-wheel drive, 90 horsepower Plymouth Acclaim. For a game that's so bent on cars sliding around and suspensions screaming against the weight of the car on every corner, it can be pretty frustrating for your power to disappear once traction breaks like this. In no world should a car like the Duke's have traction control if we're going for realistic driving feel of any kind. Its tires should be screaming for a brake every step of the way. Since it doesn't, these cars feel more homogenized. This is also at odds with the fact that every car is an automatic. That makes sense from a player perspective, just like it makes sense to have cars generally err on the side of higher grip and responsiveness like GTA 5 does. Most people aren't coming to these games for hardcore simulation, so they want that low skill floor and don't want to have to learn how to drive a manual transmission just to shoot some dudes and rob some banks. Nico and his DLC peers are never seen manually shifting in the interior, even if it's a car that probably should be manual. Despite this totally fair concession, for some reason cars still bang off the rev limiter if you put your foot to the floor, even in later gears at speed.
Please make a U-turn where safe. Turn right. Turn right.
This doesn't make too much sense in an automatic. It's also incongruous with the fact that because of the extreme traction control, you very rarely hear the tires chirp or see them break loose while driving or launching. At that point, one has to wonder if the gears are actually an element of gameplay at all, or if they're fundamentally just an audio aesthetic. This can be true in GTA 5 as well, but the cars that generally bang off of the limiter in it are the cars that have a lot of power and would have a manual gearbox in real life. Slow, plodding cars that would almost certainly be automatic tend to shift at the right times like you'd expect. Vehicle weight is similarly a double-edged sword. As mentioned previously, cars feel heavy in both accidents and in driving in GTA 4. It's more difficult to manage the weight of a heavy car, as it generally should be, but every car feels extremely heavy in GTA 4, which doesn't really make much sense. Yes, technically 98% of vehicles on the road are heavy. Literal tons of metal, plastic, rubber, and glass flying down the road. But there's still a stark difference in real life between what an 80s Toyota Corolla, the Futo in-game, feels like and what a massive SUV should feel like. But this difference is mostly felt in stopping distance and how easily the car will smash other vehicles out of its way in a collision, rather than in how the weight shifts back and forth as you maneuver through traffic. As a small aside, just because a vehicle is heavy doesn't mean it's going to shove other vehicles out of its way, particularly at low speeds. At lower speeds, what you'd need is actually torque going to the drive wheels. More torque at lower RPMs and speeds will lead to more pushing and pulling forces. Now, even though the game skews heavy with its vehicles, that doesn't mean I think the entirety of its weight problems are related to the mass of the vehicles themselves. Instead, I think the weight transfer is felt more prominently because of the feature of GTA 4's vehicles that is the most lauded by proponents of the driving model, and is also one of its most unrealistic elements. Yes, indeed, suspensions in GTA 4 are actually woefully unrealistic in ways that are rather laughable once you try to stack them up to GTA 5 in competition. The reason every car in GTA 4 feels like a 2-ton heavy thing is because the suspension on every car seems to be made of frozen sticks of butter and duct tape. When discussing the realism of the suspensions in GTA 4, a lot of videos like to use cherry-picked examples of massive SUVs and such doing handling tests in extreme circumstances, or tests where they're intentionally supposed to be flipped. And yes, you can get remarkably similar visual behavior in-game when driving at high speeds in comparable vehicles and with comparably sudden shifts in weight. But what this leaves out is twofold. First off, what's shown in these videos that's missing from the game is the grip these vehicles still maintain within many of those extreme circumstances. Because the suspension and tires can't catch the car effectively in GTA 4, since the shocks are made of slinkies and the tires are balder than Dug, it's far easier to slide out in-game than you see in these tests in real life. More importantly though, this is not the behavior you see from smaller cars or those with stiffer suspensions in real life, but GTA 4 still reacts the same way even in those circumstances, and even rather large vehicles often don't experience such severe suspension movement under severe weight transfer. Replicating what we see in GTA 4 is difficult in sims with similar vehicles, but once we get to anything smaller, even really old vehicles, it's all but impossible. I have to raise and soften the suspension on cars with really high centers of mass, with really grippy race tires just to mimic the effect easily. You see this reflected correctly in GTA 5 though. Sure, the visual movement of the suspension isn't as exaggerated, and it does kind of head in the opposite direction of GTA 4 by having suspension travel be stiffer and smaller than the average in real life. But you can still very much see the same kinds of bound and rebound in GTA 5 as you do in real life, and the cars are more likely to maintain grip as long as you keep it controlled. Remember that most road cars today are supposed to be designed to be controllable even by the worst drivers among us. If weight transfer snapped back as hard as GTA 4 shows us, let alone that quickly, every car would end up overcorrecting and snapping into a spin or a roll the second they try to dodge a pothole or someone veering into their lane or whatever. Beyond this, traction control generally induces understeer in vehicles, because understeer is considered far safer than oversteer for unskilled drivers. This is the case at slow cruising speeds in GTA 4, but isn't the case in a lot of instances at higher speeds. Part of the reason for this bias toward understeer in real life, even at higher speeds, is because it helps prevent the snap weight transfer that would cause the tires to lose grip and cause spins or rolls. I'm willing to forego discussions of other types of stability control systems since they weren't particularly common in 2008 when GTA 4 was released. But at very least, the suspension geometry of these vehicles still doesn't really mimic real life, nor does the drastic lack of tire grip. Instead, they mimic an exaggerated preconception we have about real life, and I think the reason people latch onto this exaggeration as a heightened level of realism is purely because even to this day, very few games that aren't racing games handle any of these elements of driving in interestingly nuanced ways. Again, I'm not here to trash GTA 4's driving. I grew up a car person. I grew up playing racing games. I've spent 20 years religiously playing Sims. Not the Sims, racing Sims. And so while it took some getting used to, I genuinely grew to love GTA 4's driving back in the day. But I think it's at best misguided, and at worst dishonest, to argue it's more realistic, or that cars in GTA 5 comparatively are easier to master and more simplified, purely because GTA 4's suspensions are made of gelatin and their tires stole your entire stash of baby oil to accentuate the full body wax they just got. The reality is that both games can be engagingly similar to real life in ways that are fun to play around, and can also be hilariously unrealistic in other ways that feel more like a caricature than even a light simcade experience. Neither game is ultimately trying to be a simulator, and that's fine, and just like GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas did, GTA 5 wanted to find a lower skill floor than GTA 4, but importantly they tried to keep the skill ceiling high. Rather than emphasize the difficulty of simply keeping the car under control like GTA 4 did, they wanted the challenge to be in precision driving, in taking the car and pushing it to the absolute limit. If anything makes the driving in GTA 5 too easy at times, it would be how often the roads are super wide, have plenty of runoff to avoid serious punishments for mistakes, or are just straight highways with no obstacles in sight. There's no denying that you can push cars far harder in GTA 5 than in GTA 4 if you know what you're doing. And no, it's not a skill issue. At least not for someone like myself. A good comparison point for this is Formula 1 in real life. You can have the best driver in the world in your car, and yet they can still struggle if the car itself fights back against their attempts to tame it. The skill ceiling of GTA 5 captures good synchronization between quality driver and quality car much better than GTA 4 does, undoubtedly. Whether that's to your preference or not is up to you. Sometimes I too prefer experiences where more of my effort is spent wrangling a beast, like you might in a rally car simulation. I don't think these experiences have to be at odds. I just think it's silly to look at GTA 4 and 5's driving as if they're opposite sides of a realism gradient, but refuse to actually hold up either to the scrutiny of something like a simulator as your control. Both games are very arcadey in nature, with a smattering of realistic elements. It's simply that GTA 4's difficulty and peculiarity within the wider gamut of open-world driving games stands out in a way that tickles our biases in a distinct way, and that gives the impression of excess realism where it really isn't there. Please, continue to enjoy the game you prefer. Push it to the limits and revel in the things that scratch your itches, tickle your fancies, prime your pickles, and baby oil your bald-ass tires. But also recognize that if you're legitimately trying to fiercely and definitively argue something in a GTA game of all things is particularly realistic so you can shit on another game for gamer cred, it's probably best to pick your battles better. Cue GTA 6 having simulation physics and soft body destruction on par with BeamNG Drive for some fucking reason.